Today's gospel is really one of my favorite stories where Jesus meets a deaf person. And when I read this, it made me think of upstate New York in the Adirondack Mountains. There is a camp called Camp Mark 7. It's a deaf Catholic camp. It was set up in the 1980s by a deaf priest of the name Tom Coughlin. There were also many deaf Catholic members that helped him set up Camp Mark 7. You may be wondering why they called it Camp Mark 7. Why that specific name? Well, if we look at today's story from the Gospel, we notice that it comes from the book of Mark. And if we look further, we notice it's from chapter 7. Thus the name Camp Mark 7. Camp Mark 7 was set up with a specific purpose and goal in mind. Father Coughlin and many of the deaf Catholic community members noticed that there are many deaf children, many deaf adults who tend to live in isolation and live far from each other, and who also have a very difficult time assimilating into the hearing world and communicating with hearing people. They also don't have an opportunity to learn about their Catholic faith. In today's gospel, we see a deaf person who could not communicate with hearing people because back then they probably didn't even have a sign language for the deaf. Deaf people were alone and isolated and not very connected to communities of people. And because this deaf person had no communication, they didn't have an understanding of God. Jesus met with this deaf person, opened them up, and allowed them to be able to communicate and understand God. Camp Mark 7 does the same thing. It gathers deaf people and deaf children from all over so they aren't isolated and so they can come together and learn about their Catholic faith. And I think it's possible that today's gospel inspires us to be more willing and welcoming of deaf and hearing people who are isolated, to help them feel part of a community. But also we need to support them in their faith so that they can understand how God loves them. Thank you, and God bless.